Hey everyone, this is Mukesh once again from learn-automation.com. Today in this video we are going to talk about function in JavaScript. So let's talk about what is function. So function is basically guys a set of statement that will perform a particular task, right? And you can call this function n number of times. So the main part why we use function is because we want to reuse it. So whenever you see something can be reused, you can wrap them within a function and you can call them whenever you need. So function is set of statement that will perform a particular task. So you can call them, you can call the function, you can get the values. Okay, so I will show you now how to create it, but before we start I just want to highlight that in JavaScript function also are objects. Okay, so to be more precise, every function that we will write in JavaScript is a function object. Okay, so that I will show you now. So let me show you how to create a function. Okay, and then we'll see different type of function that you can create. So let me create a fresh JavaScript file. So I will give this file name as functionsdemo.js file, and let's see how to create a function. So let me create a function. So I will just type function and I can give any name to this function. So let me give this name as say hello. Okay, I'm just giving some random names, so you can use any name. Parenthesis and curly braces open and close. So your function is ready. So basically inside this function you can write n number of statements. Okay, and the moment you have to call this, you just need to say the function name and a pair of parentheses. So in this example, for the timing, I will just say hello. Okay, as the method says, say hello, and it's just printing hello. So I will just say hello JavaScript. Now let me run this program. Okay, so the moment I say node, and if I just give this file name function demo.js, you will see it is not doing anything because we have created the function, right? But we have not called them. So whenever you have to call any function, you just have to give that function name, okay, and pair of parentheses. Again guys, if you don't give pair of parentheses, okay, the moment you run this, again it will not do anything. So make sure you give pair of parentheses. Now you run this program and you can see it is printing hello JavaScript. Very easy because we are not passing anything. So it is just saying hey, say hello. But what if I want to keep this within this console.log? For example, I just want to print that what is coming from this function. As you can see, we are not returning anything, right? So still if I will try to run this, and you will see output called undefined. It means whenever you call a function and if this function does not return anything, if you try to capture, it will always return you undefined. It will not throw any error or any null values. It will say undefined. Now let me create another function. This time I will be taking some parameters. Okay, so the first option or the first example that we have seen does not accept any parameters, plus it does not return anything. So the second example that I'm creating, it will accept some parameters and it will also return some value. So if I just write one, let's say show name. So basically this function is going to accept two arguments. Okay, so I will just give as f name, which is first name, then it is going to accept l name, which is last name. Then what I will do, I will just say return, I will say f name plus l name. Fine, so it will accept two parameters. Okay, and finally it will give me the final value after adding first name plus last name. So if I want this value, what I can do, first of all, if I want to just print, I will say console.log. If I have to call this function, as usual, I will say show name. Now I have to pass two parameter, right? Or I will say two argument. So let me pass this, the first argument as Mukesh and the second argument as Otwani. Now let me run this. So just say node function demo.js and you can see it is giving Mukesh Otwani. Let me add one space over here. So it should give me Mukesh space Otwani. Fine. So this is without any argument, this is with argument, this is without any return, this is with return. Now if you want to see the type, okay, because just now I told, right, in JavaScript function is also an object which is to be more precise, function object. So if you just type log, okay, and just say type of show name, just notice the output that this is also function object. Fine. So do not get confused whenever you see this term called function object. Okay, so I hope it is clear. Now in JavaScript we have something called function expression. Okay, so what does it mean? So let's say I'm going to create one more function. So this function, I will say f1. Okay, it's not doing anything as of now. It will simply say something called I am in f1, which is function 1. So now you can assign this to a variable. What I mean, so let's say I'm creating one variable called my function. So I'm assigning one function into one variable called my function, which is my func. So if I have to call this function now, you know what I can do, I can say my func and I will give pair of parentheses. So if I run this, I'm getting this output called I am in f1, because I'm saying my function, which is actually holding this function 1, which is f1, and it is giving me this output. In a similar fashion, let's say if I have to return something, I'm returning some random value, okay, let's say 30. So the moment I say my function, definitely it will print I am in f1, but it is also returning me 30. So if I want to store this into a variable, okay, let's say let result, so you will see I will also get the value. So let's say result. Can you see this? So this is called function expression, where basically this my func contains this function. So if you want to see again, just type again console.log type of my func, okay, my func, and let's observe the output, and you can see this is also function object. So you will see a lot of libraries use this, plus you will see this function object sometimes in array, you will see in objects, so do not get confused. Okay, now let me show you a very interesting part now. So I hope you got the point. Now if I create one more function, okay, so if I say function f2, and this function 2 or f2 will simply print that I am in f2, I am in f2. Now let me store this into another variable, and I will say this is my func, right? Let me call this as my func new. So if I have to call this, I will simply say my func2 or my func new, and I will simply call this, and it should print I am in f2. Let's run this, and yes, it is printing. See, anyways, we are storing into one variable, right? Function into a variable. So what if I remove this? Will it create any problem? Definitely not, because anyways we will be calling this function with the help of this my func new. So this is something called anonymous function here, right? Or I will say anonymous function expression. So whenever you have to call this, you have to call this using my func new. So this is called anonymous function expression. So this is allowed here. Now the question comes, what about parameters? Yes, you can still pass parameter. Okay, so let's say I'm passing num1, num2 and num3. Okay, and let's say I just want to return some value. So I will just do the addition num1, num2 and num3. So same thing you need to pass, right? Because ultimately you are calling these functions, you have to pass. So let me pass 12, let me pass 24, let me pass 36. Okay, so now it will do this addition, and finally we'll get the result. So let me directly print that result here. So the moment you pass, or the moment you call this function, my function new, this value will be passed here, and it will print this, and finally you will get the return value. So let's run this, and you can see we got the final output. This is 60 plus 12, 72. So do not get confused if you see this kind of syntax once you move it. Now before I move to arrow function, now let me quickly add this function into an object and array so that you will understand how it works. So first example that I will be taking, I will just add this function, okay, into one object. So add function into object. So I will create one, let's say my obj. Okay, so this is how we create objects, right? So let me just add one property called name, and let me give first property name called Mukesh, comma. Now pay special attention because this is exactly what we are going to do now. I'm going to create okay, I will say colon. Now I will write something called function, and I will just write something inside this function. I will say I am inside object. Okay, some random text. Okay, don't worry, you can write the actual code here. Just to make it simple, I'm just writing something. I'm inside object. So if I have to call this function, how do we access? We have seen earlier, right, that first of all I will say my obj, which is my object. Then I will use either dot annotation or bracket annotation. So I will use dot annotation now, F3, and since this is a function, I will use pair of parentheses. Okay, so let me just run this, and you can see it says I am inside object, which is this guy, but it is also printing undefined because I'm trying to print again, right? And since it is not returning anything, we are getting undefined. So if you don't want this undefined, just remove this, and this time you will see it will just say I'm inside object. So this is also allowed in JavaScript. You can have function inside one object. Let me also show you with array. So I will select ARR. So first of all, I just want to have one number, let's say 12. Then I want to have something called my name Mukesh. Now I want to have function object. So how you can do that? You can just type, let's say F1, okay, equal to function. Then here you can just have your normal function, and let me give this something called I am inside array. Okay, so ARR 0 is this, ARR 1 is this, ARR 2 is F1. So if I have to call this, I will just type ARR 2, which will return basically F1. Then I'll say pair of parentheses, and that's all. Can you see this inside array? So when I say ARR 2, it is actually returning me F1. So when I add pair of parentheses, it is calling this, which says I'm inside array. Now if you find this little complicated, let me do one thing. Let me store this into one variable. I will say let y ARR 2. Fine. So now in case if you're not familiar with array, I would highly recommend to watch my previous videos where we discussed what is array, what is object. So what I did right now, I just said give me ARR 2. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So when I say ARR 2, it will have this F1, which I'm storing into y. Now I will say y, and I will add pair of parentheses, and you can see I'm getting the same output. So this is also allowed in JavaScript. Okay, so now let's talk about arrow function. So before we start arrow function, let me create one more function so that you will understand how arrow function works. For this, I will create another function. Okay, let me give this function name as F3. You can give any name just to make it easier because we have already used F1 and F2. And this function will simply again say some random text. I will say hello JS again. Okay, doesn't matter the function body because you can have any complex code. You need to understand how arrow function works. So let me store this into a variable. I will say let z. Okay, xy we have already used. So if I have to call this, as we have seen, I will say z, and I can simply pass pair of parentheses, right? And let me run once again. come on, just a second. Yeah, hello.js again. Second time we discussed what if I don't want to give any name. Yes, you can do that. In this case it will become anonymous function, still it will work. Now if you want to work with arrow functions, you don't even have to mention this function keyword. Okay, just after pair of parentheses you can add one arrow. Okay, and this is also allowed. So now whenever you have to call, you just need to say z and pair of parentheses. So this will become your arrow function. Can you see? This might not look very easy to read, right? Because if you see the earlier functions, they are quite easy to read, they are very readable, but this is the new way of writing. Okay, when you don't want to give any function name, you just want to store into variable and you want to use it, use arrow functions. So once you move ahead to WebDriver IO or Cypress, you will see this arrow functions a lot. Okay, but even if you don't use it, it's okay, you can still go with the function expressions. What if I have to pass certain parameters? Yes, you can still do that because it is still a function, right? So let's say I want to pass two parameters again. I will say x1 and x2. Okay, so if I pass x1, let's say 12 and 45 from here. So 12 will be stored into x1, 45 will be stored into x2. I can get the return value as well. So I will say return x1 plus x2 and you will get the result. Okay, so if I save this file, and definitely we're returning, so we need to print it here. So I will say log console.log and you will see the final output would be 57. First of all, it will say hello.js again, then it is returning x1 and x2. So this is just like a normal function. It is just now it does not have a name. It does not have even function keyword. You're using arrow function. Now before we end this video, I also want to show you one more variation. Okay, for that let me create one more example so that you will have a better understanding. For this, let me create one one variable called my address. Okay, just a random variable I'm creating. Then I will use pair of parentheses, then I will use arrow function. Okay, and I will just write my address, let's say Bangalore, and if I want to call this, I will just call my address and it should print Bangalore, right? And yes, it's printing Bangalore. But what if I don't want these curly braces too? Is it allowed? Yes, with some conditions. What is the condition? I will tell you. So now if you see, I just removed these curly braces and it is still working. So what if I run this code again? It is still giving Bangalore. So you will see this kind of statement. The only problem here is that you cannot have multiple statements. Whenever you have one line of code or one statement which can complete your task, you can go with single line arrow functions where you don't have to use the curly braces too. But if you have multiple statements, please go ahead and use this part. This is very rare. We will be using it in our automation. But yes, in case if you have just one line of code, instead of writing the complete one, you can go with this. I totally agree, this is not that readable. But yes, if you just want to quickly write one function which will do just one part of the code or one small activity, go ahead with this. Now the question might come that what if I have some 10 parameters? That is allowed. Okay, so let's say I want to give, first of all, one is house number. Okay, then let's say street number. So in this case, if you have to get these values, now you can use something called string literals that we have discussed in our previous video. So in case if you haven't seen that, please go ahead and watch. So I'm going to use the same. What I will do, let me just create another variable. Okay, let me call this as new and let me accept this part. Okay, first of all I will remove, because in this I don't want to pass any parameter. In the second one I'm passing two parameters. If I want to receive this here, what I will use something called backtick here and backtick here, right, that we discussed earlier. Now if I want to capture this house or if I want to capture this street, I will be using something called dollar. Then in curly braces, I will be using this house, right? Then for the second one, again I will use dollar symbol, curly braces open and close, and then I will be using this street, right? So now if I want to call this, I will just say my address new, pair of parentheses, house, I will say some Sahaj, and street, let's say Whitefield. I'm just giving some random values. So when I will call this function, Sahaj will be passed here, Whitefield will be passed here. It will say Sahaj, Whitefield, Bangalore. Now let me run this and you can see. So please try from your end, okay? In case if you're not comfortable with this, perfectly fine. You can still go with the previous approach. You can have curly braces here, open, and you can close this curly braces here. It's totally up to you. But I want to highlight, because if you see this kind of syntax, do not get confused. This is only needed when you have a single statement, because here you cannot do any return, okay? So let me quickly give the final recap, because we have covered a lot. So initially we started what is function. Function is a set of statement that will do a particular task. We have seen how to get function. You need to use function keyword, function name, pair of parentheses, and curly bracket start and end, and you can write the function body. So the moment you call this, if this function does not return anything, you will get undefined. In the second example, we have seen how to pass parameters. You can pass n number of parameters here. You can receive and you can return the value. So if you want to get this value, you can store either in a variable. In our case, we have just used console.log, so it is printing my name. Then we have seen it is giving us the type of as function object. Then we discussed how we can store the function into a variable. So we created one function f1 and we stored into variable, and we called just like a normal function. Then we have used the same examples, but this time we have passed multiple parameters. Okay, so this is actually anonymous. We removed the s1 and we passed 3 parameters. That 3 parameters we are using, we are doing some calculation, and then we were printing. Then we discussed how we can add function into an object. So I created one object called my obj. Then I added one property. The second property, which is f3, I added a function. So if I have to access, I can use dot operator or bracket annotation. So I used my obj dot f3 and I called this. Then in the next example, I created one array. I added 1 as a number, 1 as a string, 1 as a function. So if I have to call this, I can access using index. Then we discussed about arrow function, right? That if you don't want to give even function keyword, you can remove that and you can replace with one arrow, and you can write your complete function. And whenever you have to call, just give that variable name and the number of arguments. Then we discussed that if you have just one statement, you can even ignore this curly braces and it will be in one line. In that case, if you have to pass certain parameters, you can do that. You can use string literals and you can do that. That's all for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this session and I hope you got something new out of this video. If yes, then do subscribe this channel, share with your friends and colleagues, and I will see you in the next video. Have a nice day. Bye bye.